Without light, there's no path from this darkness.
If you really care about the lives lost here, then you should honor the lives lost and call for a ceasefire in Palestine. Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now!
That's all right. That's all right. That's all right. That's all right.
That was footage from a speech President Biden gave at Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston, South Carolina yesterday. The historically black church and site of Dylann Roof's racist 2015 massacre served as a staging ground for the president to try to rally voters in the state ahead of the 2024 election. Now, MSNBC host and former Biden aide Symone Sanders lashed out at protesters at the church, saying Mother Emanuel AME is hallowed ground in the AME church community. In Charleston especially, the shock of people in the crowd at protesters yelling out while President Biden was speaking from the pulpit cannot be overstated. I, too, couldn't believe it. The president's poll numbers continue to stay stagnant. A new AP poll suggests that many Democratic voters would be unsatisfied if Biden were nominated as the Democratic candidate for president, while more independent voters would be dissatisfied if Biden were nominated than Trump.
Well, the polling hits keep coming. Future Majority reports Trump is up 6 points in crucial swing state Pennsylvania, while Rasmussen reports shows large swaths of voters, nearly 2/3 of voters, see the crisis at the southern border as an invasion, a critical failure point for Biden as immigration continues to rank very highly as an important issue for voters. Here to discuss Biden's reelection chances and polling data is host of the Sabby Sabs podcast, Sabrina Salvati. Welcome back, Sabrina.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me on.
Always great to see you. First, why don't you address this dust up at the church and the complaints from some people like Symone Sanders that this was inappropriate given the setting?
The nerve of Joe Biden to appear at a black church after he has reneged on the promises that he made to the black community when he ran for president in 2020. He has some gall. This just goes to show you, if you look at the protesters that were in the audience of that church, those were younger voters. It shows you that once again, Joe Biden has not found a way to connect with young voters in this country. Most of the people in that audience are older voters, which is what you would expect if you go to a lot of the black churches, predominantly in the South. But we can't be mistaken. Jim Clyburn is sitting there right next to Joe Biden, almost as a sidekick, so to speak. And Jim Clyburn bears the responsibility of some of this as well, because he was the one that told his constituents to support Joe Biden in 2020 because Joe Biden was going to deliver for the African-American community. I actually graduated from the University of South Carolina, but I didn't grow up in South Carolina. So I never really understood the admiration for someone like Jim Clyburn. People would say to me, it's because he hosts a fish fry. You can fry your own fish. This just goes to show you how little we are willing to settle for in the black community. We need to start asking these leaders, some of the black leaders, what are they doing for the community today? And Jim Clyburn is not doing much for the community today. His district is one of the poorest districts in the country. Meanwhile, Jim is living just fine. So I think people like him have led us down this path. They've had us continue on the same path that we've been doing for the past couple decades, which is why we haven't received any type of progress when it comes to politics in this country. Now, in reference to Symone Sanders, we have to remember Symone Sanders was Joe Biden's senior advisor when he was running for president for 2020. She was hoping that she would get that press secretary gig. That didn't pan out for her. He gave that to Jen Psaki instead. And it almost seems like they gave her an MSNBC position kind of to just quiet her for so much of a bit. But this is Symone Sanders' job. She is still supposed to carry weight for the Democratic Party, to carry weight for Joe Biden, to defend him at all costs. And when she makes this statement that she's more concerned about the protesters that confronted Joe Biden, I'm more concerned about genocide, Simone. I'm more concerned about our tax dollars being spent to fund these wars abroad. I'm more concerned about the fact that the Democratic Party till this day refuses to give any type of real concessions to the African American community. Those are the things that Simone Sanders should be upset about, but she's not. She's trying to make sure she holds her spot at MSNBC.
I think you make a number of really important points there, both about Clyburn's influence in the district. Remember that a significant majority of South Carolina voters in 2020 said they voted for Joe Biden precisely because of Jim Clyburn's endorsement, as opposed to anything particular about Joe Biden. He really is a kingmaker in the state. He also, as you pointed out, has one of the poorest districts in the country, and perhaps unrelatedly in terms of his political affiliations, has taken more money from the pharmaceutical industry than any other member of Congress. Now, as back to the Simone Sanders tweet and the backlash, you did see a lot of people making exactly that point in response to her tweet, saying, what about the genocide? You're talking about hollow ground in a church when people are protesting Israel's bombing of the third oldest church in the entire world that is in Gaza, and the treatment of so many Palestinian Christians who have died in the birthplace of Christianity. Christmas, obviously, we remember, was canceled this year, and the birthplace of Jesus. And of course, a former Christian Congress member, two family members were killed pretty early on in this conflict. I want to ask you about the kind of racial dynamics of this as they played out in the wake of this controversy. One of the initial accusations was that these were white protesters that were disrupting a black space. And there was a clear kind of identity politics pivot that was made by the Democratic Party to say these are pesky white protesters that show no respect for the black community, and trying to pit the black community, which has shown so much solidarity for the Palestinian cause, against the Palestinian community, both in the United States of America and in the diaspora. What do you make of that choice? And what is the truth of what was happening there in the church?
There was also, if you look at the woman standing next to the white woman there was a black person there too as well. But the thing is that you should be disrupting these spaces whenever these politicians are present. This is where Joe Biden chose to be present at that point in time, regardless if it's a black church, regardless if it's a school, regardless if it's a fundraiser that these politicians are attending. You should disrupt all spaces in effort to cease fire in reference to a genocide. I can't even believe people are using this type of excuse when they're sitting up here carrying weight for a president of the United States who co-wrote the crime bill. Like, this is just absolutely ridiculous. Now he's complicit in a genocide. Anything to protect the status quo, anything to protect the Democratic Party, which is a corporate organization. We have to push back against the status quo in this country. And I don't know what it's going to take at this point. I do know that Jim Clyburn, for example, did have a challenger. I believe Marcel is running against Jim Clyburn again. Like, I don't know what more it's going to take for people to really wake up and understand that the status quo is leading us to a dead zone in this country. And if we want some type of real concessions for the black community, we're going to have to push some of these former black leaders to the side, and we need new leadership. That's what it's really going to take. But I think that's an excuse that they tried to use. Of course, they tried to play this card. How dare they even show up in that space in the first place? Well, Joe Biden is in that space, and Joe Biden is an African American. That's not really what it's about.
Wow.
They just didn't like the fact that they interrupted the idea to protest.
Are you sure he's not African American? Because I have a hard time imagining that a white presidential candidate would turn to the black community and say, you ain't black if you don't support me. I'm joking. Of course, we should just also mention, I don't know that we know actually the race of this woman in the middle. She very may well be Palestinian. And we also should note, because we didn't do it so up top, and we cut the clip off a little bit early, the Free Palestine cheers and advocates were drowned out by the rest of the crowd chanting 4 more years. And some folks thought that was a really interesting demonstration of the priorities of the Democratic Party, that calls for peace and a ceasefire would be responded to with a political cry. I also just wanted to read one tweet from journalist Terrell Jermaine Starr, who I think represented some interesting pushback here. He said, if you invite politics into the pulpit by inviting a presidential candidate to speak at a church, you welcome debate in the pews. Do you think there's something to that you open the door to this kind of a political response if you turn a church, a house of worship, into a pulpit for a political exercise?
That's right. I mean, everyone that attends this event isn't necessarily supposed to agree with Joe Biden and praise and applaud Joe Biden. We're supposed to have free speech in this country, right? So we're supposed to welcome those opportunities. But the thing is that when we look at people, again, like the puppet sitting next to him, Jim Clyburn, he has these churches in his back pocket. This is why so many people, he was able to convince them to come out and support Joe Biden instead of Bernie Sanders, because Jim Clyburn has black churches on speed dial. He's able to win over that congregation, and that's all it takes. And people have to understand that a lot of this, when we talk about politics and how people choose to vote in reference to the black community, a lot of it starts with the black church. So that is where you have to go to make some type of change. If Jim Clyburn was serious about progress in this country, all he would have to do was say, listen, guys, this has not been working. We've been supporting the Democratic Party. It is time for us to move outside of this vehicle. And it is time for us to honestly push towards some type of third party or independent race, because they actually haven't been helping the African-American community. They would follow him, Bree. They would go where he will go. That's the thing. So Jim Clyburn, people like him, they are holding us back. And that's a big problem.
Sabby Sabs, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.